Since my last recording, I've remembered a lot of things that happened in Malta that I forgot to mention before. So before continuing my saga, I will mention these. Occasionally, when we was off duty in Malta, we used to go to the perimeter of the hospital and look over the 12th wall down at the aerodrome laying below us, and saw some most heartwarming and sad sights. On one occasion, this Spitfire is coming in the middle of an air raid, obviously in some disarray or something or the other, and as he lands, his nose of the aircraft goes into a bomb crater which hasn't been filled up yet because the raid's still on. The pilot gets out and his leg seems to be disabled because he's dragging it, and he collapses a few yards from the plane. A couple of the infantrymen who were on the anti-aircraft defence of the drone, and also there for filling in bomb craters, dashed out and helped him back to the perimeter of the drone to the comparative safety. All this time this is going on, there's enemy aircraft buzzing around, coming down, machine gunning. So it took a lot of courage for those two soldiers to go out and rescue that man like that. But on another occasion, the Spitfire was coming in, his propeller was feathered, and he was losing power, you could see that. And as he got about 50 feet to the ground, it suddenly nosedived into the ground and burst into flames. Obviously the pilot was killed. So in trying to save the aircraft, which was a vital thing, he lost his own life. One other time, while we were bombing the drone, this Stuka dive bomber let his bomb go, probably a bit prematurely, and instead of hitting the drone, it hit a church on the other side of the drone from where we was watching. So this church, Moster Church, is in a little village called Moster, and is the third largest unsupported dome in the world, so you can imagine it's quite a big dome. Well, as the bomb went through, we was waiting for see all it collapse, but nothing happened. And wondered why. We found out later that the bomb had gone through the roof, failed to explode, and just came to a halt without injuring anybody, because the church was packed with civilians who, as was practice in Malta, the civilians used to go into the air raid into the churches for shelter. That bomb today is now on display in the church and was defused by the REs, who have got their photos of them there beside the bomb, and exaltation to their bravery in doing it. We had a heavy raid one night, just at dusk, when some fighters were being flown in. Excuse me, I must go to the phone. That was Tony on the phone. Anyway, to continue, yes, we was having a heavy air raid, and just at dusk, these aircraft that had been flown in the night before, the day before, and quite a few unexploded bombs dropped in our area, and we had quite a problem going round banking them up with sandbanks where the holes were. I finally got down to sleep, and in the early hours of this morning, no air raid alert, there's a very heavy explosion. So we all dashed out, and not far from where we were sleeping, a fellow called Sergeant Jack Waterson had his individual brick bunk which he used to sleep. But where the bunk stood was just a heap of rubble, and on top was his twisted rubble bed with old Jack lying on top. And luckily all he had was a fractured parietal bone, which knitted in time by itself. So he was a very lucky man. He went to sleep on a bomb and lived to tell the tale. But this Sergeant Waterston, he was quite a character. He used to sit outside his bunk with a guitar strumming away, and his favourite song was Frankie and Johnny. I don't know if you know the one. Frankie and Johnny were lovers. Da, 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 da. Anyway, they used to call him Snake in the Maltese because the whole of his arms and legs were entwined with tattoos of snakes. My nickname to the Maltese was Lofty or Tweeder. Tweeder being the Maltese for lofty, because I was so tall. Poor old Jack walked here, but eventually he got invaded home. He's a regular soldier, been all over the world with the army. On a 24-hour pass down in Valletta with Jeffrey one day, we decided we'd have a trip across the Sliema, go in the Blue Heaven bar, which has got a nice bar. So we went down to the quayside in Valletta to get the ferry which used to run across the Sliema. Well, we got on the ferry, which was a little boat, probably about 25-30 foot long, with a little steam engine with an awning back and front. Anyway, we left the shore, and just as we did, the bloody air raid siren went. And planes came over and started bombing Manole Island. Well, this Manole Island is a small island just off the shore in Sliema, attached to the mainland by a causeway. It was a main submarine base and bristled with anti-aircraft guns, because the submarines, when they were in a raid, they used to submerge in the harbour to try and stop damage. Although I know on one occasion, one before he could get down, he had to direct it down the conning tower and killed several crew members who were the rear party on board. Anyway, to continue, this ferry boat couldn't dock in Sliema because of the raid going on. We had to dock near Manole Island. So we were driving round and round the harbour and bombs dropping all over the bloody place. So eventually, when the siren raid finishes, we pull in and we walk along to the Blue Heaven, which is right opposite the causeway in Manole Island, and it was just a pile of debris. It had a direct hit, and they were getting out the dead and wounded soldiers and sailors and some of the hostesses. Very pathetic scene coming out. I'm just having them to drink, and then all of a sudden you're dead. And just but nearby was a dead Gary horse. A Gary is the horse-drawn carriage taxi, and all around it were the civilians cutting off joints because they were so hungry, and anything eatable they were after, obviously. One occasion in Tarfa, during a heavy raid, I took shelter in the basement of the reception. It was only a one-storey building, so it wouldn't have been a lot of protection if we'd been hit. When there was no light on, and you could tell some bombs had fallen pretty close by the detonations, and somebody shouted down, "Any medical personnel, report up to top straight away." Well, it was all dark. I thought, well, nobody knows I'm down here, but what if the light goes and they see me here? It won't be very nice. So anyway, I went up. They gave me 4 Maltese stretcher bearers and a stretcher, told me that A block had been hit, to go across to see the casualties. So we made our way to A block, which was probably about 50 or 60 yards from the reception, and it was raid was still on, the bombs dropping flares as usual, and in Malta the moonlight is like daylight. It was just like was across in virtually daylight, and some of these planes, as they were pulling out their dives after dropping their bombs, you could even see the rear gunner having a go with his machine guns. We reached the A block, and there was a fellow laid out there. He was obviously dead. He had virtually cut in two by a piece of shrapnel. We found another fellow, he wasn't too bad, put him on the stretcher, so I told the two of the Maltese to carry him back to reception. Looked around and found another fellow, by then there's some more medical corps there picking up cases, and we never had another stretcher, so we put this fellow on a door, and these two Maltese and myself went with him back to reception. But you know, in a case like that, you know, you feel scared, but you've got to do it. Because one time in Malta there, I got very, very bomb happy. I made sure I was never far away from a air raid shelter, so that I could duck down at the first opportunity. But I thought, well, this is getting a bit too much, so I thought, I've got to cure myself of this. So what I did, I sorted out all the various vantage points, high level roofs are built in such like. And when there was a raid, I used to go up there and you used to get so excited watching the dog fights and the action going on that you forgot your own danger, and it proved quite exhilarating. It's hard to explain the feeling, but you know, if ever you've been excited about something, you know what I mean. We used to get a three-day rest camp every, I think it's every 6 months. And the first one we went to was a place called Paradise Bay, a beautiful bay, all natural. A lovely sandy beach, shallow water, and there's a disused army camp nearby which we was using, and all we had to do was laze around and sunbathe and swim and eat such little food there was for 3 days. Made quite a welcome change. But the Germans must have got the hero because they used to come over occasionally strafing because Malta being only 90 square miles, you could never really get away from the bombs and such like. I'm trying to think of anything else that happened in Malta. No, quite a few things happened really, but it's hard to remember them all. They come back to you in flashes, if you get what I mean. But we had our CO, the example was a Colonel HBF Dixon, MC, and it served in the First World War, served in Russia, married a Russian woman, and he came to Malta before the war, and his wife came with him, and we used to call him an international because they had a Dachshund dog. There was a pretty heavy daylight raid one day, and Dixon comes dashing out of his office with a drawn 45, blazing away at these German planes, which were, well, the lowest was about 1,000 feet, so you can imagine the 45 had no effect on him, but he was just there blazing away. I thought, I expect he's thinking to himself, well, at least I'm showing something. And he used to walk around the area, and he had it on his steel helmet he had painted, OC Troops in Tarver, Officer OC PAD number 6 area, which became a passive, PAD stands for Passive Air Defence. Whenever a convoy came in, the fire picket, which had a mobile fire pump, would be detailed to go down the docks, and it wasn't a very nice place to go when there was a convoy because that's a target of all the bombers. Fortunately, I was never on picket duty when the when the convoys came in, but I know several fellows who were, and they went sick when they were detailed for that. Issues with rifles and bayonets, as I mentioned previously, proved to be a dangerous thing. There's two fellows who I knew quite well, Jock Kilty, young Scotch boy, and Yorkie Breakwiller, 40-year-old on Yorkie and Minor, but very nice, really, real nice fellow, really. You know, they were attached to an infant battalion. They got drunk one night, got arguing, and Yorkie stuck a bayonet in and killed his thigh. Well, he got put on a charge and got sentenced to 6 months detention in the Corradina barracks, which were just near the docks, and they were run by the Royal Marines, and they were very, very harsh. Well, a short time later, on our orders, it appeared number so-and-so Private Breakwell has had his sentence remitted by the GOC for bravery in the docks whilst helping to unload a convoy. So he was lucky in that respect, although if he hadn't been doing time he'd have probably got a decoration. But he's a great character. Great character. I'm going to pause for a bit and have a cup of tea. There's quite a few instances regarding the Navy that I can relate to you. Quite a few destroyers were sunk in the harbour. To name some, the Lance, Legion, Lively. A light cruiser, the Kensington, was also sunk in the harbour. And another cruiser, HMS Penelope, she was badly damaged, and I saw her laying in the quayside here. One mass of holes all over the superstructure and the bodywork of the boat, whatever they call it. So they started trying to get her seaworthy again. And while she'd got seaworthy, the Germans still tried to sink her, and she suffered, unfortunately, quite a few more casualties. In fact, she looked such a state they called her the Pepper Pot Penelope, and she made quite a name for herself because eventually she got repaired enough to get away under her own steam and made it safely. I'm not sure whether it was brought to Alexandria, but he made it safely away from Malta. Then when Italy came out of the war in 1943, the whole of the Italian fleet surrendered to the British, and it was a marvellous sight. From high ground you could see HMS Warspite, an old battle cruiser, and one flotilla of destroyers leading the whole of the Italian battle fleet in. Boats that could have blown the Warspite and the others out to sea with the least compunction. There must have been 7 or 8 battleships, cruisers, destroyers, seaplane carriers. Oh, it's terrific. And all under the escort of one battle cruiser and a flotilla of destroyers. Because the old Warspite, I've got fond memories of her. The first convoy we had in Malta after the outbreak of war, the Warspite led her into the harbour, and there was an air raid at the time, but on the quarter deck there was a marine band playing them into the harbour like as was normal in peacetime. You know, it took real courage to do that. I think that about finishes my Memoirs of Malta. I might come to think of some more, but I'll try and remember. I left the previous tape where I was up in Scotland after having my disembarkation leave after coming home from Malta. Whilst I was up there, D-Day happened, and just after I got a telegram given to me. It said on it, house bombed, both okay, dead. So I went straight into the orderly room and asked if I could have compassionate leave. Oh no, you can't have leave, he said, as long as your father's at home he can look after things. If only if the police get in touch with us we let you go. So that was good enough. I went outside, got hold of the post corporal, got him to send a telegram straight away back. Contact police, might get leave. Anyway, a couple of hours later, couldn't be much more, I got called into the orderly room. Said the police have been after you, your parents are in a arrest centre, and you can have compassionate leave. Come back in about 5 or 10 minutes, you'll be your travel warrant and your pass and your ration card waiting for you, and transport into Glasgow. Anyway, I got this, picked up all the documents, got into Glasgow in time to get the night train down to Euston. Oh my God, the train, it was standing room only, no buffet on board. We did stop at Carlisle just in time to dash out, get a railway pie, such a terrible thing, and a cup of tea before the train was starting to pull out, so I had to dash back and get on it. Got into Euston in the early hours of the morning. When I went to East Ham, I thought, well, I'll go to Forest Gate. I know where Mum and Dad are. And at the last moment I decided I'd have a look at the house on the way to the police station. So I got off the bus at Honey Road, walked up the road, and most of the roof was missing. Doors and windows had been blown out, and about 4 or 5 houses along where the flats are now, it's just a heavy heap of debris. Anyway, I looked inside the house, and who shall I find? My father. I said, where's Mum? He said, well, I've taken her down to Sittingbourne yesterday after we got bombed. I said, oh, I said, what, not in the rest of it? No, he said, the water and the gas are on. He said, so I'm all right. He said, I'm on night work anyway. So we had a cup of tea, and he was telling me about the bombing. Apparently 4 or 5 of the neighbours were killed, and one woman, Mrs. Ellis, who I'd known from a young child, she had her arm blown off. The first thing after we had a cup of tea, the father took me up to the Montague Road School, which was the ARP, and all the wardens where he was based. Introduced me to all the wardens and that, and we decided to go for a drink. So we went across to the Ruskin, had a drink there. From there we went down to the Essex, crossed the road, got a bus to Ilford, went in the Red Line, had a couple of drinks there, then came back home. I was tired out after my journey, so if I was going to have a lay down indoors, so I said, well, I'll go and sleep in the Anderson shelter at the bottom of the garden. So I went in this shelter, which is half under the ground, half above the ground, and was sound asleep. My father woke me. He said, the detective wants to see you. I wonder what the hell he wants. So I went with him to the door, or where the door was, and I said, does he want me? He said, yes. He said, you answered the description of a soldier that's been seen looting. I said, where's this supposed to take place? Oh, he said, over the last 2 or 3 days. Well, I said, it couldn't have been me. I said, it's been passed and everything. I've only arrived in London this morning. And yeah, it turns out what happened, my father had taken me up to the ARP centre, and one of the women wardens, seeing me, by mistake, had given my description to the police. So I said to the detective, I wish to goodness I'd have known you was following us. I said, otherwise I would have led you a merry dance. He said, I'm glad you didn't. Well, that night father went to work, and I went out for a drink, and I don't quite remember how or where or when I met her, but I met this girl, Rita. She's a rather tall, dark-haired girl, and talking to her, she told me she was separated from her husband, and her mother was looking after a little girl, and she was working as a cashier in Richard's shops in the High Street. Anyway, we got chatting, so I said, well, come home for a cup of coffee. So she came home, had a cup of coffee, and she was telling me that before, when she was younger, she'd been a member of Beam's Breezy Babes, which was quite a well-known juvenile dancing troupe. But when she came 16, she left them and never carried on in show business. But very attractive girl. Well, whilst we were there, the air raid went, so I said we better go down the shelter. So we went down the end of the shelter, and need I say more, the obvious happened. We fell in each other's arms, and that was the start of a traumatic experience for me. Anyway, I arranged to meet her next day at East Ham Station. We're going to go to Barking to cinema. I just met her at East Ham Station, and all of a sudden I felt a tap on my shoulder. And I turned as a fellow there, he said, "Excuse me," he said, "you know, that's my wife you're with." I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't realise." He said, "Well, not as much to me," he said. "I hope she treats you better than she treats me." And off he went. She said, "Oh," she said, "very funny." He seemed a bit of a peculiar fella. Anyway, by the end of that leave, I'm madly in love, or infatuated, whatever you like to call it. And I went back to Scotland, and hadn't been back there more than a few days. I got 7 days embarkation leave because we was going over to Normandy. So I came home again and spent most of the time with Rita. Then went back to Scotland, and we got on this train in a little station outside Glasgow, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Hay box, insulated box of tea, and haversack ration each person. And the train was a non-corridor train, and we started off, and it was about 10 o'clock next morning. We reached London. I never thought we was going to make it. We had to peer out the windows because there was no corridor, and in some cases the girls gave us quite a wave as we went past. And when we got to London, apparently there's some system whereby you go through the underground system from one network to the other, like from the Scottish line to the Southern line. Went through Earl's Court somewhere, I'm not quite sure where. Anyway, we got into the New Forest that afternoon, and we marched to this camping area where we was issued with a lifesaver, which was just a rubber ring, 24-hour ration pack, and that was a lot. So we was going to go the next day. So next day lorries take us down to Southsea, and jutting out from the promenade there's all these scaffolding jetties, and as we went on this landing craft, there was a women's voluntary service giving us a pack of cigarettes, some sweets and chocolate. Very nice. Anyway, we got on the landing craft, and it was called the Landing Craft Infantry, quite a big, fair size, but we had to go down into sort of a manhole cover into there where there's all bugs laid out. Well, we spent most of the time on deck. We laid off in the harbour there for the rest of the day, and I'm friendly with a fellow called Vic Indigo. His father had a restaurant or cafe in Fleet Street. He's quite a white boy. Anyway, we joined up together in a card school, either banker or pontoon. When one of us won the bank, the other one withdrew, and one dealt, one paid out. And we carried on that right until we got to France, and won a fortune. My pockets were stuffed with all this Allied military money because they had no French money, so they gave us money printed by the army for use in France. So we came ashore, and as we were coming off the landing craft, Going on other landing craft which were already emptied are German prisoners, and leading one column was a little boy, could have been more than about 9 or 10 years old, had a German uniform on, and he's going with them onto the boat to go back to England. We finally arrived at the field. God knows where it was, right in the middle of nowhere, and we had to sleep under bivouacs, and that is, you had a ground sheet, two of you got ground sheets, made a sort of a tent with them, and slept in them, which is all very well, but if it rained hard, and even though you used to dig a little trench around it, you used to get soaked out. And we lived there for 2 or 3 weeks, but we found a nearby farmhouse, and we used to go there, and they used to give us cider from a barrel in a little tin mug. But this was just outside Bayeux, and while we were there, they sent several thousand bomber raids over to bomb Caen, and that was quite a noisy affair because it wasn't that many miles away. We had 1 or 2 desultory raids by German planes, but not a lot. Then finally we got our marching orders. Apparently it'd been a big breakthrough, so we all loaded up ambulances with all our equipment, God knows what else, and started off in convoy. The first place we went to was Bayeux, which was very relatively undamaged, but Caen was just a shambles, just a heap of rubble. And then just after Caen we came to the Falaise Gap, which had been where a German army had been trapped and had been pounded from all sides, although quite a few did manage to escape. And the smell of death there, I couldn't get rid of it for ages afterwards. The Germans had a lot of horse transport, and the horses were laying there with their legs stuck in the air, all their bellies swollen, tanks all burnt out, smell of dead and decaying flesh, or revolting. Then we left there. A little far along we stopped at a farmhouse, brew up and have a cup of tea. And in the farmhouse yard there's this woman with a soldier on top of her, obviously being at it, and they're both dead, being hit by a shell that burst overhead. One of the lads said, "I don't want you to die." That night we stayed at a place called Poy, just outside Amiens, and it was, how can I explain, a wood on 3 sides, and in the centre of this wood was this might have been a German army camp, so they put us up there. We went into the village that night. Got talking to the local resistance fighters, the Mackies. Some of them only young boys and girls of 16, 17, walking around with grenades hanging from their waists and God knows what else. Anyway, I was drinking Calvados brandy, which is made from apples, and I'm afraid I got rather drunk. I went back to this camp, went to sleep, and during the night, without me knowing, a pocket of Germans who were in the woods raided the camp for food and shot it all up, and I slept right the way through it. Fortunately, I don't think anybody was killed actually. They chased them off. Next day we started out again towards Brussels, because the forward troops weren't all that far in advance of us. And we were going past one particular place. It's a road wooded on hill on one side and a deep valley on the other side. Well, as we're going through there, gunfire starts coming down our convoy from the woods. It's obviously some Germans being left, because what's happened, some of the Germans had been left his pockets, and the forward troops just pushed on and left the others to be wiped up later. But a load of Mackies who were around the road, they went dashing into the forest, load of gunfire. They came out about a quarter of an hour later, more arms, more grenades. They'd wiped them out. Yeah, brave young kids they were. I'm much more like a kid myself. We got a little farther along the road, and the driver of us, who was driving the ambulance, he said we'll have a little tour around. So he stopped the ambulance, and the dispatch rider came on and said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Oh, I'm in a bit of trouble." He said, "I'll catch you up." So we went off down a side road, and I thought, well, this is a bit dangerous because there's Germans still around. And we finished up in a little village. In fact, we liberated it. They hadn't seen any English troops. They didn't realise what was happening. Because they brought out wine, and we gave them packets of biscuits we got from the Salvation Army mobile canteen, and we had quite a little party there for a time. And I said to the driver, well, in fact, if we joined the convoy, otherwise what would happen to us. And never know, some Germans might show up here. So with a load of goodbyes, off we went. Finally caught up with the convoy and got in Brussels about midday time, I think it was. Pulled up at the street, he directed where to go, and all the cafes and bars and they were all playing records they must have stored while the German had been occupied, such as going to hang out and washing on the Siegfried line and pack up your troubles and RBC, you in all the old familiar places, all the old tunes, which as I know, they must have stored them. Eventually we got directed to the Brookman Hospital, which was going to open as a casualty clearing station. And the Germans had got out so quick, they didn't even have bodies in the morgue. Anyway, we had a job of sorting it all out, getting ready for casualties, and they told us we weren't allowed out the confines of the hospital, but they might just as well spoke to the devil, because that night we all went down into the main heart of Brussels, the Bourse. Oh my God, you never seen it like it. It was treated like royalty. Much as you could do to buy a drink, and girls come up kissing their companies, which wasn't bad at all. And we had quite a party. Next morning, I had the job of given the job as night orderly. Well, we was there 2 or 3 weeks. We got in with a local bar, and had some great times there. But then they had the Arnhem too. We saw all the planes go over us, because Arnhem's not that far from Brussels. And then when they evacuated it, we started getting the casualties. And our job was to admit for 24 hours, and then 24 hours discharge. Well, another unit did the same. So there was a continual flow. The only people not transferred after 24 hours were those who were too ill to move. Eventually, they decided to evacuate Arnhem, as you know, and we had the survivors come in. Oh, in a really terrible state they were in. They hadn't had their wounds dressed since the initial dressing. They were dirty, or wounds cornered with maggots, and God knows what else. I was on the night ward. I had in charge of 100 patients, and all I had was 2 Belgian Red Cross workers to help me, and a sister used to come round periodically to see what was happening. Well, by the time I gave one lot of injections, either penicillin or morphine, I had to start doing it all again. And None of this new syringe for every injection. All you did was you had about a dozen needles and you used them in rotation. Then when you'd done them, you'd boil them up and use them again. But use the same syringe. Then you had to undo the wounds so that when the MO came around, he could see decide what was going to do with them. Well, one fellow there had a very bad shrapnel wound in his leg, in his calf, and when I took the dressing of it, it's crawled with maggots. So the sister came round, and she was no older than me, only a young bit of a girl. She'd never had any. She'd done nursing, obviously, and done training, but she'd never seen any war wounds before, so she wasn't used to it. She said, "Well, get those maggots cleared out of there." I said, "No, sister," so they won't do any harm. I said, "They'll only eat the dead tissue and stop him getting gangrene. You do as you're told." I said, "I'm sorry, I mustn't, sister." So I'll tell the MO when he comes round. But when the MO came round, she complained to him. He said, "The order's quite right, sister. Give way to experience in this case, you should have done." You had to put her in her place. Anyway, I was on that for about a fortnight, I think. And it was very, very hard, this, because we've got a lot of casualty beds coming in. And during the day I used to live it up and then go on duty. One poor devil, he'd had a shattered leg where he trod on a mine that exploded. And he was told, he said, "No, I'm keeping my toes moving," he says, the same as the doctor told me. And it came from Barkingside, Ilford. And we got talking about the local, and next night I came on duty and they said, "That mate of yours with the shattered foot," he said, "we have to take his leg off below the knee today. Will you tell him?" I said, "Well, why me?" They said, "Well, you seem to know him." So anyway, I went back to the billet, got a bottle of beer, went in the wall, poured it out, gave it to him. He said, "I'm using my toes okay?" I said, "Don't try any more, chummy," I said. "I'm afraid they had to take your leg off below the knee." I said, "Otherwise you'd have had gangrene and you'd have died." "Oh," I said, "Thanks for telling me, and thanks for the beer." Anyway, he was evacuated the same night. Another fellow we had come in, he was an American paratrooper. He was in, his whole body from the knees to the neck was encased in plaster. He had so many wounds and so many broken bones, and it took about 3 people to lift him over and turn him over periodically. Another fellow there, his whole leg was one mass of bullet holes, and we had to spray penicillin powder into the holes. Eventually we moved from there to get nearer the action, a little place called Hasselt, near the Dutch-German border. Whilst we were there, they machine gunned us, the bastards. For a time I was stretcher bearing on duties, and then there's a nearby battle going on in Reichswald Forest. I got called into reception and said they had a special patient to go to Brussels, a facial maxillary operation. He'd had a machine gun bullet through the jaw, and I was taken by ambulance, immediately taken to Brussels, this special centre. So luckily I had the same driver who was with me before. on the way up to Brussels. We carried on from the Hasselt, been snowing hard, it is very treacherous, and we made very slow progress. In fact, once or twice we had to be dug out of snowdrifts, and we got to Louvain and we virtually came to a halt. We couldn't move any further, but we explained to the military police who were controlling what traffic there was. We had to get this further to hospital, so they cleared the way for us through the snow. They got some machines, so stoves down there, made the way for us. And all the time I've got this poor devil in the back there, and he's got a clip on his tongue coming outside to stop him swallowing his tongue, but he would have choked. And when I first got him in the ambulance, he said to me, he muttered, which I made it out to be, one of our own guns did this. So I thought, oh my God, you know. Anyway, we finally get him to this hospital in Brussels, and I'd heard from a letter from home that my uncle Wilfo had come off a motorbike as a DR, and he was in hospital there. So whilst I was there, I went and saw him. Oh, this, by the way, this was the early hours of the morning we got there. We'd been about 15 hours doing about 60 miles. Most terrible journey. So we went back to the cafe after we'd dropped the patient on seeing Wilfo. We went back to the cafe that we'd used while we were in Brussels, and they put us up for gave us a bed, had a sleep, got up, and about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, or maybe 3 o'clock, we started on our way back. But as we got on the road, it's very icy, but we managed to creep along, and we're passing a column of tank transporters. That's, you know, big lorries with tanks on top. Then all of a sudden, the bloody Germans come down, machine gunning this bloody lot. And I thought, well, there's me, all I'm in here is a canvas-sided bloody ambulance. So I said to the driver, of course, I've got to put my foot down here, so we can go a lot faster than these lorries offered you. So we're shooting along past this convoy, and we come along a bit further. There's an obstruction of the road, so he has to brake, and we go around about 3 times in a